Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Rep by Rep Strength Podcast. This is Travis, sitting down today with Brandon Van Mater, head strength coach at Wes Del High School in Indiana. And hey, Brandon, thanks for hopping on today, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on here.
So let's kick it off right away. How long you been out at Wes Del
now? This is my fourth year out there. So I started in 2019. Unfortunately, I had to go through the whole COVID thing, deal with all that. But this is we're a little bit over a quarter of the way through my fourth year.
Gotcha. And what's your main population? Like, are you working only juniors, seniors, or what's your age groups you've got?
So I have during the school day, I've got 6 of the 7 class periods. I only teach strength conditioning. I've got sophomore through seniors, so they have to, as a freshman, they have to take by state law, freshman or 100 level or freshman PE class. And then once they become a sophomore, if they want to continue on in any kind of PE class, they can take my strength conditioning course. And then after school, I'm there for about an hour and a half every day that I get anywhere from 6th grade to 12th grade.
Cool. That's great, man, because they're probably one of the few schools in the area, right, that's actually like got a dedicated strength and conditioning coach, strength and conditioning class.
Yeah, we are. So I know other schools have, it would be like an advanced PE class, or it might even be considered a strength conditioning or weightlifting class. Yorktown here in Muncie they're the only one that I know of that has a designated strength coach. I know like Delta has, which is another bigger school here in Muncie, they have their football coach is also the strength conditioning coach. So he runs all those classes during the day. And that's kind of what you see with a lot of schools, is that one of the sport coaches ends up coaching those classes or coaching in the weight room. But us, especially for how small of a school we are, I mean, I would say, especially in Delaware County, we are one of, if not the smallest school there, that we have me as the full-time 100% designated strength conditioning coach.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Because I remember, I grew up and I went to a school that was in literally the next county over from where you're at, and it was just a couple free weights, a bunch of machines, and then the PE teacher was not that involved with it. It was more of we're in here with the weight room, you got to move around for 45 minutes. It wasn't, there was zero structure, really zero instruction of any kind. So,
but before I got there, so our former football coach was kind of the guy that was in charge of the weight room, but I think he was biology teacher. He was one of the science teachers. So our head basketball coach is the head of the PE department. So he actually ran the class. I don't even remember what it was called before I got there. But they had different workouts taped on the wall that you could do. But from my knowledge, before I got there, it was a lot of bench pressing and curls.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, they have their place every once in a while. I still have to battle that with a bunch of kids, but I've at least got them to start squatting and deadlifting and cleaning a lot more because they have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's so funny to me is I'll talk to guys at different places where they're strength and conditioning coaches. And even me being on the tactical side, there's a lot of, hey, we're just going to get really good at the basics. And even from a culture standpoint, there's certain workouts that have been around for a while that guys want to follow, but it's not always in their best interest. So it's this slow culture shift of, hey, let's look at this a little differently. Let's be a little more analytical so we can get you a better, safer result.
Yeah, for sure. But that was kind of another thing too. When I first started, there was, I mean, if you looked at our old record board, there was what appeared to be some big numbers thrown up on stuff. But it was just one of those that right away I started just setting the tone on what I wanted as far as technique and quality of movement. And you could see those records were slightly skewed.
Oh yeah.
And it was just like they, and I won't say there's anything wrong with it, but like they, rather than doing a full depth back squat, they would do a box squat where they squatted down to a bench. But what they would do with it was they would tend to use that bench as something to bounce off of. It wasn't like an actual box squat where you either sit down all the way on the box and then drive up, or barely touch your butt on the box and drive up. It was, I'm going to see how hard I can bounce off of the seat to then come back up. And so it was just one of those from the get go. I was like, we're getting rid of the benches. We're going to learn how to squat all the way down. When we deadlift, we're going to, honestly, a lot of kids didn't even deadlift before I got there. And that's probably one of my most popular movements now, probably partially because they know how much I love deadlifting.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those slowly but surely, after 4 years, getting a culture change and getting more kids to buy into doing that. And honestly, that's the beauty of high school, is like, I don't have to get too crazy in depth with stuff. I can stick to a lot of basic things. And because they're 15 to 18 years old, most of them are going to get stronger regardless of what they do, as long as they're in there doing something.
And you know what's interesting is that some of the guys that I see, I mean, the pipeline I'm involved with, there's guys that are as young as 17, because they had an early, they could start early kind of thing, with as old as 40. And so you get some of those guys that are between 17 and 23. They've never had any kind of strength and conditioning. So I'm sure if you and I laid out exactly what we're doing, it would look pretty similar.
Yeah, I'm sure it would.
Because it's just more of these basics, and we don't need to get fancy with any of it until we've got mastery.
Yeah, for sure. I would say the main difference would probably be just due to the equipment that each of us had to use.
Yeah, I mean, even some of it, I've got, like, whoever was there before me, they had a huge space, but they didn't maximize the space with what you and I are accustomed to, when we went through Ball State and all that stuff. So there could have been a better setup or utilization of equipment.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
It's still one of those, I'm waiting on some money to drop so that I can, design it a little bit better. But there was the other day, there's like all these misconceptions about strength and conditioning, and I was giving a presentation in the local fire department, and this dude raised his hand and goes, "Hey, can I get your opinion on deadlifts? I've heard they're dangerous." I'm like, no. I think my face turned red, because I was like, it's the most fundamental pattern you have to do.
Yeah.
And as long as you progress it slowly and you're methodical, you'll be fine.
Yeah, that's honestly probably, I think it was well before I was at Wes Del. I think I had moved back to Muncie, and like I was working full time at Menards to pay bills, but I was training people off and on, just trying to help, or to build up some clientele. And I had someone reach out to me that had either one or two pretty major back surgeries, but was bedridden for a while and whatnot, and was asking me about stuff. And I was like, well, the first thing I need to teach you to do is how to deadlift properly. It's just one of the, and he, like, it was, and I even explained it because he had a younger kid at the time. I was like, it's one of those, like, if your kid is on the ground crying, like, you need to be able to bend over, pick them up, and not hurt your back doing it.
Yeah.
But their first thought was because they see me post a video deadlifting 500 plus, and they're like, well, there's no way I can do that. And
you didn't go in day one and deadlift 500?
Yeah. And so it's one of my favorite things when I've had multiple people that, like, I'll be explaining something, and they're like, well, I don't want to do what you do. And my first thought is like, you won't, trust me.
Good luck.
I've put almost 20 years of training into this body. That's the reason I can do what I do.
Yeah.
Especially with my high school kids, they always try to judge their lifts off of what I can do. And I'm like, I've been training longer than you've been alive.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't, if there's any reason that you're doing what I'm doing something wrong to myself.
Yeah. And just to clarify, so you lifted through high school, I would imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I met you in college, and you're lifting in college in the weight room all the time.
Yep.
And now have you moved exclusively to strongman type format, or do you compete any other style?
So I don't really compete in anything else. And I'll kind of break that down a little bit, starting from high school. So, like, when I mean, we didn't have a strength coach. It was our PE guy who, I mean, he knew a pretty fair amount, but looking back on it, it was just one he was really good at motivating us and making us work hard, which is, I feel like, is half the battle sometimes.
Yep.
But looking back on it, because I actually still have notebooks from high school all the way through college with all my workouts in it. Like, it was a bodybuilder split. We did a chest, back, and arm day one day, and then a leg and shoulder day, and then we'd go back and forth on that. And then Friday was like plyos and conditioning. So it wasn't bad by any means. And kind of like I said earlier, if you're a high school kid who's 15 to 18 years old, that's especially a male raging with testosterone, like, you're going to get stronger doing something.
Yeah.
But so did that. And then throughout college, playing baseball, everything that I thought I was doing was geared towards me getting better at baseball. So I really, and then even going into grad school, when I was done playing baseball, I started focusing a lot more on Olympic lifting. Kind of realized I sucked at that. And before I had knee surgery to repair my meniscus in 2016. And after that was when I started Strongman. But I would truly go to say from grad school on up to this point is where I've actually truly trained. And that's where I really started learning about how to train and how to write up a program and progress and all that. Everything else beforehand wasn't bad because I stayed consistent with it. But it was so kind of here and there with training. But I did my first Strongman in 2016, and that's the only thing I've ever competed in since then.
Gotcha. So that caught the bug there, and then can you just give us some numbers here as far as, like, are you guys exclusively doing axle deadlift, or what's the main events that you're focused
on? So honestly, that's kind of the beauty of a Strongman. It's almost CrossFit-esque in a sense that every competition's different. So like if you're a power lifter, you're going to squat, bench, and deadlift. You get 3 attempts on each one every time you go out. If you're an Olympic lifter, you get a snatch and clean and jerk. You get 3 attempts on each one each time you go out. With a Strongman competition, typically you will see some variation of a deadlift, some variation of an overhead press, some type of carry. Typically, most of them that I've done, at least, there's some type of other grip event. And then I feel like a majority of ones I've seen or done, there's something with the stones, with the Atlas stones or with kegs or something along those lines, where it's just a weird implement that you have to either put on a platform or put over a bar. I actually, a couple weeks ago, did my first competition since my daughter had been born. And we had so the first event was a max distance sandbag carry. After that, we had what's called a Bavarian deadlift, where you're basically standing on 2 platforms. The weight is directly below you on more or less like a plate-loaded pipe. And then there's a chain with a handle connected to that pipe. And so with the Bavarian version, it's kind of like a rack pull. So it starts just below your knees. When you go to pick it up, you just have to make sure everything's locked in and stable, because it kind of works a little like a pendulum. So if you're moving at all, that way it can sway a little bit, which is going to throw you off. If we're being completely honest, I did not like that variation. As much as I love deadlifting, that was there's that, and then what is called a Ukrainian deadlift. Exact same setup, but rather than pulling from just below the knee, it's more like a deficit. So you're pulling from like the ankle.
Okay.
So I've done both of those in competition. They're not very fun. I've done an axle one before. Also not very fun. But really, when it comes down to it, if it's not a regular straight up barbell deadlift, not to say I don't like it, but it's not my favorite. And then when you get to whatever the overhead event is, typically most of the time you have to do some variation of a clean. So it's they either have a log or an axle bar. Every once in a while, you'll see like a keg press or something with a stone where you have to press a stone. You've got your circus dumbbell, which is just that like big oversized where you pull it up your shoulder and have to maneuver it up overhead. When you get to your carry events, like I said, I had a sandbag carry. There's just your typical farmer's carry where you're just carrying a lot of weight in each hand for whatever distance. I've done a stone carry before. And then whatever event with the stones, like I said, typically it's something where you either have a medley of like 4 or 5 stones that you got to pick up a light one and put it at a higher platform, and then by the time you get to your heaviest one, it's at the lowest platform, or you just have to pick up your heaviest weight over a bar, which they usually use a yoke for that. But yeah, typically, like I said, it's usually some kind of deadlift, some type of overhead press, some variation of the carry, which is typically some type of medley, and then something else for your grip is what you see a lot in strongman.
Yeah, that sounds pretty similar to what we'll do at least one day of the week here with the tactical side. Is we'll do some type of strongman type training day exclusively, with as many awkward shaped objects as I can find in the weight room, and I don't even care if it's symmetrically loaded or not. I want it to be, because these guys are going to go out and they're going to be in the woods and they're going to have to traverse all sorts of different terrain and all this stuff. But so the question I've got for you is, so when you're going to competition, are you drained the following day or 2 days? I mean, how deep into fatigue are you getting?
So typically, definitely the next day, I'm usually pretty exhausted. The second day after probably also depends on how much weight I had to cut the day before to make weight. Like the worst I've ever had to do was actually right before COVID shut everything down. I had a competition up in Fort Wayne, and my scale here at home had me 2 or 3 pounds heavy, which was kind of one of those, no problem. I could sweat it out, no big deal. But when I got to the place to weigh in, they had me 11 pounds heavy. So I spent about 6 hours in a sauna just sweating and in a very dark mindset, being miserable. But I made weight. And so that was one, like, even me trying. And I mean, that's one too. The beauty of strongman is typically as long as you're not a super heavyweight, if you have to weigh in, you've got 24 hours to refuel as much as you want to. So I was able to do pretty decent as far as refueling, but like just the aspect of having to sweat out 11 pounds for 6 hours within 24 hours before a competition, like, it wasn't a great setup for me. So I felt a little worse after that. This last one that I did, I think, so I had the weigh-ins on Friday. I started kind of working on sweating out on Thursday night. And I think I had to do like 6 or 7 pounds total, which was between Thursday night and Friday morning. So like, it sucked, but it wasn't that terrible. And I competed on Saturday, didn't feel awesome on Sunday, but then I was pretty good on Monday. I was ready to squat again and get right back into Squattober.
Because that's the other thing I've been talking to people a lot about recently is, everybody sees like the highlight reels on Instagram where guys are doing like their max singles all the time and all this stuff. And my argument is, hang on. Oh, all right. Anyway, my argument is that if you're doing that too frequent, then it doesn't set you up for the subsequent training session that's to come. And it's going to drain you so much so that you probably can't hit the volumes necessary for development of that quality. You know what I mean? So to hear it from strongman competitor, where I'd imagine comp day is completely different than a training day in terms of how much you're going to ramp yourself up, caffeine intake or whatever else you may be doing. Because if you're to do that all the time, what are the odds that you would be developed enough to, hit good numbers?
Right. Yeah. That's, honestly, a great example of that. So I would go to say this past one that I did overall is probably the least prepped per event, not necessarily strength wise, because I've been able to maintain and keep and even build pretty good strength. It was a little bit over a year from the one I did to this past one. And it was kind of one of those two, like I said, it was the first one I did since my daughter was born. So like my main focus wasn't necessarily on finding the next competition to do. It was, I'm going to train when I can. If I'm at home, I'm setting a timer for 45 minutes and getting it done. But I was able to pretty well keep and continue to build on a lot of strength. But per event, I would say I was the least prepared for it, because I didn't even touch a sandbag or the log until like 2 weeks before the competition. And I mean, those were my two worst events that I did. And it was one of those, the day that I did my sandbag training here at home. The one that I have at home is a 220 sandbag. I had to carry a 250 for the competition. And it was just, they had 50-foot markers. You just go down and back until you drop it. And so, oh yeah, it's miserable. But I was doing a down and back in my driveways, probably close to that 50-foot and then 50-foot back. And so I was doing it one day and I could barely get down and back without dropping it. But I also knew come competition time, like when it's time to go, I'm just a competitive person as it is. So I can flip that switch a little bit, but then you get those competitive nerves going. You get that adrenaline rush that, that's at least going to benefit you a slight bit per event. And that was kind of what each one was. And really with, strongman, especially, it's one of those, a lot of the ones that I've done that are well run, weight classes start at a different event. And so like on the last one I did, my weight class, we started at the sandbag and then we went to the Bavarian deadlift. And so you cycle through that depending upon what the event is. If it's a timed event, those get through quickly. If it's a max weight event, it just kind of depends on what the heaviest weight picked up is. But typically you're looking at no more than 45 minutes per event. But they usually is 10 to 15 minutes in between. So like, there's no way in hell you can keep that stimulated for that long versus if you're just doing a training session and you take your pre-workout or take your caffeine, like you're maybe doing an hour, 15, maybe 2. I mean, if you're going over 2, I think you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
But really, if you're going over an hour 15, I think you're doing something wrong. But they're like our competition started at 10. We got done with the last event by like 2. So it was 4 hours. Like there's no way I'm staying that stimulated for that long. And it's one of those that I had some caffeine before the first event, but then it's just, all right, when I got to get jacked up, it's per event and I do it right before I'm going. So there's no way you can handle that if you're trying to do that on a day in, day out basis, just in training.
Yeah. Cause that's a mistake. I'll see some guys, they'll come into my office and they'll say, hey, can you look over my training plan that, they put together for themselves. And one of the biggest mistakes is I'll see them base their 4, 8, 12-week program off of their all-time best for that specific lift that was done on different days. And then from there, we'll have a conversation about, percentages in terms of if you're going to use percentages, create a buffer zone of a +5 or a -5% or both, to accommodate, how good did you feel on those days? Yeah. Was there an external stimulus? Do you get performance anxiety when you test? And then from there, like, what was your body weight? Did you do all 3 of those events like right then and there, or were they spread out by a week? Because that's going to change the outcome a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but yeah, that brings me to something I was wanting to that we talked about prior to the call was, just this concept of indicator lifts. So my example was, for me, was when I did this Anderson pin press, Anderson Z press. I did it back in like 2011. Hit like 120-ish for a single. And then I think it was 2 weeks ago, I tested it again. And it was the first time I'd done it from the pins in like 10 years. And I got 150 for a double. So for that 30-ish pound increase, and I doubled it, what were the main drivers? It's probably going to be, 10 more years of training experience. But more than anything, I think it's just continuing to tinker around and figure out volumes and intensities and exercises that I respond well to, and then putting it all together, compounded over time with consistency. So I don't think there's like a singular event, but that's one that I can absolutely measure. How's my upper body doing in terms of development? Right. So for you, what are some indicators that you have? I mean, are you always defaulting back to like a weighted chin or a deadlift, or what are you looking at?
So I guess a good example for me on that would be, I'm that weird person that could probably tell you my like 1 through 10 rep maxes on everything, at least like all time, whatever I've done.
Yep.
And it's always funny talking to my kids at school because it's one of those that like they'll ask me how much I can clean, and I'm like, well, at one point in time when I was strong, I cleaned 355, but now like I hit 315 a month ago, and they're like, well, I guess you lost strength. I'm like, no, it's just I'm 6 years older and my body doesn't respond to it as well anymore. It beats me down, so I can't do it every day like I used to.
Yeah.
But I'll look back and like like if you just take a back squat, the first time I back squatted 400 or 182 was in grad school, probably, I remember it was 2012 or 2013. It was my first year of grad school. And I mean, we're 10 years past that now. And so that's one of those that like, even on my worst, shittiest feeling day, I know that I can hit that for 3 to 5 reps. So that's kind of one of those indicators that like, I know that I still have that, and I'll have, like my deadlift is even one too, that like I've deadlifted 610 pounds, but I'm not in shape to do that right now. If I could still hit probably 550 plus on any given day, then I'm pretty good with it. And like when I do, I honestly would say I probably in the last 6 or 7 years have done one strongman competition a year. So I'll write a progression leading up to that. And then throughout the year, I typically will only do one other actual like programmed out progression where I'm actually very structured with it. And I'll base numbers. Like I might, it kind of depends on what my body weight's at and how often I've been doing the particular lifts I'm going to do for that program. But I'll base those numbers off of about 90% of my max. Like that'll be what I establish as my max weight, and then take percentages off of that 90%. And then kind of go from there. And even I wouldn't even say I'm dead set to that, because there's been plenty of days where especially in the last year, where I got 3 hours of sleep and was supposed to deadlift 580 for a double, and it's like I can't move right now, so we're gonna just see what I can do and or even just rather than saying like I have to deadlift on Friday, it's like, well, maybe we just wait till Saturday or Sunday and see what we can do then.
Yeah.
But I think to sum that up, because I talked way too long on it.
No, you're good.
Is have your know what your all-time max is. That's great to know. But then, if you don't compete, think of that as like your competition max. But then you also have your training or your everyday max. So something that even on the worst, shittiest day that you just got over being sick and haven't slept well for 2 or 3 days, you could still walk in the gym and hit whatever that number is on any given day. And if that particular number, that everyday max, continues to go up and up, then I think you're on the right path.
Yeah, I would agree. Is seeing some form of progression with that, because I feel you on that one, man. I've got, 2 kids that are 7 and 4, and, I used to get, like, if I wasn't hitting a certain number or whatever, before I had kids, if I wasn't hitting a certain number in the weight room, I would get so pissed and like, oh, yeah, screw this is stupid, and like the whole thing. And now I'm just like, whatever, man. Like, at least I'm getting in the weight room and doing my thing. And what's funny is since I've don't get as stressed out about it, I actually have noticed my performance continues to get better.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, the same thing. Like, the kids come in our bedroom in the middle of the night. And they're like, I'm thirsty. It's like, hey, thirsty, I'm dad. No, it's like, get out of here. Go get some water. Why do you need to wake me up to tell me this? But that's why I've just become so much more flexible with the training that I do for myself.
Yeah.
It's not that it still has structure within the training session. Right. But the expectation is like, well, how'd last night go? How'd the night before go? Mm-hmm. Have I been eating the kids' chicken nuggets? Like, it's just life happens. But I mean, I don't know. That's where I notice an issue is like a lot of guys they'll get to the end of their competitive career, whatever it is they're doing, or their career that's required a lot of physicality, and they'll stop completely and they'll look for any out. Mm-hmm. And then the diet just continues what they were eating.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, holy shit, no wonder this is a cluster,
yeah.
you know. But
I even see that with, more along the lines of, so last year, our football coach from last year, we have a different coach this year, but he was kind of that old school mindset of record board and this and that. And so, like, honestly, I got rid of the record board that we had when I first started, and then wasn't even a thought in my mind that, oh, we need to have a record board up. But he wanted one in there, so we got one. And it's one of those that, like, I didn't argue it because I knew it was going to make some of the kids work harder because they wanted to see their name up there. But I've got so many of them now that if their name's up there, they're like, oh, well, I can squat this or I can bench this. And you look back on it, they didn't do anything. They didn't come in once or even go to Y or do anything all summer long. Barely have trained, just getting back into class and starting stuff. And then they're pissed because they can't hit that same number.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you haven't trained for 3.5 months. What do you expect? Well, I expect to hit a PR every time I walk in the weight room. And then I always go to, if I had a PR every time I walked in the weight room, I would be picking up the school right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause that's the other thing that I feel like I've been talking to people a ton about is, call it the retention rate, decay rate, training residual, whatever. How long do you hold on to that specific quality before you're going to start losing it? So every single time people just, I don't know why they default and assume that, like, I have to max all this all the time and I have to push it. It's like, actually the residual is like 25 to 35 days for your absolute strength.
Yeah.
So if you start paying attention and keeping tight records, then you can look and see, when is it I start to decay? Oh, okay, cool. I need to do something. And we're just talking to retain what you've got. But I don't know. It's just people expect mastery of everything forever and always, no matter what. But
anyway. Every time I've told one of my kids that if they truly want to get strong, they need to do it 3 to 4 times a week for 10 years. They don't like that answer.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is like, it's hard to maintain the consistency. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, yesterday, just for myself, I didn't want to do anything yesterday. I was not feeling ready for training at all. But you start getting loose, and okay, I guess I can do this part for 10 minutes. And
right.
All right. Next part of my conditioning session, I guess I can do this part for 10 minutes. And then before you know it, holy shit, I feel better. Let's move on. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's honestly I get that way plenty of times. And I can't really complain much because I either am in a weight room at school all day, or when I get home, I've got my garage that I can fully train in. So, like, I can't say that I didn't have time to make it to the gym. But the number of times where, like, just a day at school where I didn't get a chance to do it, and it's like, well, we'll just take the day off. But as soon as I get my daughter to bed, like, I'll just be like, all right, I have the space here. I'm going to go out and do something. It may be for 10 minutes. It may be for 20 minutes. I may be out here for an hour. If my daughter wakes up and is crying after 25 minutes, then I'm done. Like, but I did something.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my biggest thing. And I will say, honestly, since she's been born, the timing of my training sessions has significantly gone down, because I was kind of the guy that lived in there and could get away with spending 2, 3, 4 hours in there. But I'd do a set of something and then sit on my phone for 5 minutes and then talk to someone else for 5 minutes and then have to rewarm back up because I waited too long.
Yeah.
Versus now, like, if I do it during, like, I'll lift sometimes during school, and I've got this block of class period to get whatever I need to get done. Or if I am here at home, if it's during my daughter's nap time, that's typically anywhere from 45 minutes to maybe an hour and a half tops. All right, I'm setting a timer for 45 minutes and I got to get done what I can get done.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you just said before, like, and I would say the daily frequency has honestly gone down some too, because I'll find myself 1 to 2, maybe even 1 to 3 times a week where I may not do anything, or weekends especially. I used to be someone that I had to do something on the weekends, and I would still say either Saturday or Sunday I'll try to do something where maybe I just throw my rucksack on and go outside and ruck for 30 to 40 minutes. but I at least have to do something active. But I mean, I'm physically actual strength training 3 to 4 days a week, and my body feels a lot better from it. And I also don't feel like on the days that I don't do something, I don't feel like I'm wasting the day near as bad.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point. I was reading Dan John's book. What was it? I think it's called Attempts. Most recent one I read from him, but he was talking about little and often being a core principle of training is better than sometimes and a lot. You know what I mean? Yeah. So anyway, I noticed that as well. Is my sessions in the gym, including warm-ups and everything, is probably 45 minutes, and it's just I've got time caps on everything, so that makes me move faster. Yep. I've got my earbuds in. Because, it was the same thing. Going back to, like, Ball State weight room, when I would come in there and sit down and hang out with you, Robe, whoever else, it was not uncommon for all of us to be sitting in there for, like, 3, 4, 5 hours.
Right.
And then you're like, shit, where'd the day go? You know what I mean? Like, but I learned a ton in there, and I'm trying to explain to more of these guys about, just how lucky I was to be born where I was, and then to get into Ball State exercise science program, and then be in the weight room at the time I was, and just learn so much from so many guys in there.
Yeah, for sure. It was kind of one of the same things for me. Like it didn't really ever strike me until, multiple years after I had finished grad school, and people asking me things, because it was just one of those, like, everything training related always just seemed like pretty common sense to me. Yeah. Like I would learn it and it was just like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But realizing how many people just like it is not common sense to them. And then looking back and it's like, well, because of the education that I got, and I would say well over half, if not 3/4 plus of that comes from being in that weight room at Ball State with Robe and Mandy and the other people that were in there.
Yeah. I honestly think it's one of those things where, a couple, if I had known what I wanted to do for a living, I could have saved like $75,000. It's like just by sitting in there, the classroom stuff was great, but it became even more obvious. Like I felt like I learned more in the weight room, talking to other guys who are either going through grad school, PhD programs, whatever, and just listening to those guys and then watching it get applied. And then I think one of the coolest things was that I really appreciated from Robe was that he would hand us teams. Like each one of us had a team to work with.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
That allowed us to get our hands dirty right away. To, hey, why are you programming this? Okay, we're going to rip it apart now. And then, do you think you did right? What do you think you did wrong? And then just breaking everything down.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's one of those that just very, very fortunate kind of situations. But
well, and if I would go to say I would at least like to hope that other programs or internships are different now, but like a lot of that time back then, if you were interning, like if you got a Notre Dame internship or whatever, where you're working with some big D1 team, like you're probably handing out water bottles or cleaning up their barbell or something, where you're like not hands-on coaching. And like that was one of those from the get-go. When we had our first meeting with Rob and Mandy, they were like, hey, you need to find something that you're going to train for, because if you're not going to program and train hard yourself, none of these kids will believe that or will trust in you to do it too. And then at least my year in grad school, the first year, we had to list off like 5 teams that we would want to work with. Now, we weren't guaranteed getting with any of those teams, but it was just write them down and then maybe you will, maybe you won't. Because I ended up having, originally I was playing with men's volleyball and men's tennis. Ended up with men's volleyball, and then I took over women's tennis instead of men's tennis. So, and it was like I wanted to work with baseball because I played baseball for my whole life and thought I wanted to specify in that. And And honestly, if you look at it, volleyball and tennis are both similar-esque sports to baseball, where you're still an overhead and still a lot of rotational stuff that I didn't have to go too far out of my realm, but at the same time, it was also very different. And so it was a great learning experience for me, where I was just thrown into both of those teams. And the person who was ahead of me, that was the second year, she more or less spent 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month, where she oversaw it. And then she said, they're yours. And so pretty well from a month, maybe 2 months into my first year of grad school, like I was in charge of both of those teams, and then also spend as much time as I could in the weight room to work with any of the other teams that I could too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the good thing about, I felt like we had the unique opportunity to make mistakes more or less.
Yep. For sure.
And that was actually a good thing, because if you're told every move to make, then you won't be able to think for yourself once you get out. And I remember it was me and Cole were kind of going through the same time, because after I graduated, I went to grad school at IU. But anyway, me and Cole were going through at the same time, and we had this dude in the summertime that was trying to play basketball overseas. And like, you learn about all this stuff in books and classroom setting, and then you go to the weight room and you're like, this doesn't necessarily apply in this situation right now. But anyway, this guy it was a run and gun basketball offense. So he needed to lose weight and get stronger, was essentially the goal. And he was a big dude, and he would lose like 10 or 11 pounds within the week.
Yeah.
And then no shit, on like Friday, Saturday night, probably Sunday, he would go to a barbecue. So like, he would go eat Taco Bell, drink, go to a barbecue, like family barbecue, and he'd come back like plus 13 pounds. So now it's like, dude, you're 2 pounds plus what we just cut you down from the week. So then it was just this infuriating, like, all right. But that was the first guy that we kind of had our hands on there, as far as. And then I got assigned, I think it was men's swimming.
Okay. Yeah.
So that was an interesting one, because the sport coach, nice guy, but no idea what the hell he was talking about, as far as, how sport coaches are, where they'll tell you what they think their needs are.
Right.
And they're trying to talk performance. And it's like, because I remember this guy literally telling me, we need our swimmers to have stronger triceps to press the water out of the way, or whatever. It's like, okay. All right.
I definitely lucked out with the two teams I had, because they pretty well were just like, you're the one that knows what you're talking about in here. Just don't get them hurt.
Yeah.
And then same thing at Wes Del. Like, I had pretty much almost all the coaches there. They just said, they're yours. You're the one that knows what you're talking about. I trust that you'll do what's in the best interest for them. And so I've lucked out in that aspect. And most of my coaching career, that I haven't had to deal with too much of that. At the same time, that's kind of what steered me away from wanting to, in particular, be in the college setting.
Yeah.
Because I saw way too much of that, and have seen way too much of that with a lot of my other buddies and whatnot that are coaches. That if you look at it, at the end of the day, that sport coach is kind of your boss. And if he says, hey, they need to run 3 miles a day, like, you got to unfortunately figure out some way to do that. And that's kind of, I've never had that issue at all in the high school setting.
Yeah. And that was, I remember Robe telling me a story one time. I can't remember who was the men's basketball coach at the time, but they lined up all the players, and the head coach walked through with Robe, and he just started going like, he needs bigger arms, he needs bigger calves, and like all aesthetics.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And he was like, what the hell? This dude just pulled 405 as a freshman. You think I give a shit about his shoulder development? But that's just the thing, is like, you're absolutely right. Like, the college setting, sport coach ultimately gets to say what's what. And I don't know. That was just early stuff. But I felt like, again, just learning more from a hands-on perspective than I ever did from a book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I would almost go to say a good explanation of it is like in the classroom is going to give you the terminology and whatnot that you need to know. But being hands-on is going to show you what you need to know, and you can feel it and you can see it and all that. And especially with coaching high schoolers or military, or really anything, like you can even go college or pro, like 95% of those kids, probably 99% of those kids are people don't care what the correct terminology is.
Yeah.
They just want to know either how do I get it stronger or how do I fix it when it's injured. Yeah. And so like, I don't need to tell them that the insertion of their bicep goes up to here, and that if you do this properly with this particular motion, then this is going to do this. And it's just like, let's just do some hammer curls and get jacked.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you're absolutely right. It's like, that's where, you hear that whole discussion of like the science and the art, you need the science to a degree, and then you need the art a lot.
Oh yeah.
Because like guys will come in and they tell me what they think their problem is. And I'm not going to ruin that relationship by going, well, actually, let me tell you, what you mean here. And you also have to be able to, that was another thing I remember just getting like pounded in early, was you have to be able to justify each and everything you do and have a very good reason for it. And I'm thankful for that, because there's guys that, are trying to teach other guys in the tactical side. And unless you can justify it very well, they'll probably just tell you to fuck off. Like,
yeah,
hey, I don't care what you have to say. Yeah. But I don't know. It's one of those things of like, a lot of that stuff got so ingrained early, man, where it's just, there's some gems in there. I wish there was like a microphone in the weight room.
Yeah.
They could just recorded everything and bottled it up.
Yeah. Kind of along the same lines. I mean, it's one of those too, like with high school kids, you gotta earn their trust for them to buy into what you're trying to teach them and get them to go. Cause like, they don't understand the aspect of training for aesthetics versus training for performance. They just see a bodybuilder on TikTok and they're like, oh, I want to look like that. Yeah. And then, but like perfect example, a few of my basketball kids, getting them to understand how much better off they're doing with doing cleans than constantly coming in and trying to do bench press and curls all day is just how much more explosive and powerful you're going to get. And that's going to turn over to you being able to move faster on the court, being able to jump higher on the court. And that's one of those, if I can't justify that, then I'm not going to have any buy-in and I'm not going to have much success from it. So I think that's one of those kind of go hand in hand. But with teenage high school students, if you don't get that trust from them and at least give them the basic understanding of why it's going to help you, then they might as well not even be doing it. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's one of the biggest, I hate to say win an argument, but at least get position to lean my way when I'm talking to some of these guys, is talking about injury prevention. Yeah. And, a lot of them are walking around in some degree of pain, and they've accepted that as, it must be normal. It's like, no, man, we can fix a ton of this. We can adjust these things. This is not forever and always. But just as an example, is like these guys will do somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 1,000 push-ups a day, and I have no control over that. Yeah. And then they'll ruck on top of it, and the rucks weigh minimum 50 pounds. Yeah. They'll get up to like 125 for some guys, 150 pounds for others. Anyway, so then you look at the front side of them, and they're all loaded and rotated, and they've been doing a bunch of horizontal pressing. Do we really need to do more bench pressing, and do we need to do more curls? It's like, no. It's just hilarious, because it's like, man, I look like a genius because all I have them do a ton of is a bunch of posterior chain work, and suddenly they're feeling better. And I'm like, I didn't do anything that crazy, guys. This is pretty textbook stuff as far as like what you're supposed to do. But it clears up a lot of issues.
Oh yeah.
Just by creating some balance.
I was actually talking to a couple of my kids the other day because they were trying to compare themselves to me in training. And I was like, and honestly, it's like I've actually, from up until probably a month out from my competition, what I was having them do, not only myself, but my superintendent, we've been following the exact same program.
Oh, yeah.
As what I'm making my kids do, because it's one of those, I was like, I'm going to prove to you that 2 old guys can get stronger doing this. So if 2 old guys can get stronger doing this, then all of you testosterone enraged teenage boys should be able to get stronger doing this. But before I started doing that, like I hadn't bench pressed in probably 2 years.
Yeah.
And everybody was just like, oh, Van Meter hates bench. So I don't hate bench. I just, every time I've done it, I always end up, my shoulder or my elbow hurts because my elbow is jacked up. And I always push the frequency, or I push the volume, or I push something too hard. And then something not necessarily breaks, but becomes irritated enough that I don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. And I found that me not benching doesn't bother it. So I would do push-ups, weighted push-ups, some dumbbell bench, but like most of my horizontal pressing was just variations of push-ups. And then I did a lot of overhead pressing. But I started back to bench pressing, and I was very methodical with it. Like it was the start of the year, we would do 3 sets of like 5 to build up. And then it was 3 sets of 5 at a working weight. And I told every single kid this from the get-go. I was like, whatever week 1's weight is should feel like a 6 out of 10. Like I know most of you guys don't know your maxes, but it should be really easy. When we get to week 2, we're going to add 5 to 10 pounds. And if you can do those working sets at perfect reps, then week 3, we're going to add 5 to 10 pounds. And so I've continually done that week after week with it. And I think the first week I hit like 185 for 3 sets of 5. And we're into doing doubles and singles now, but I ended up hitting 285 for a single last week, which is 20 pounds off of my all-time PR. And that's me only bench pressing for 10, 11 weeks now.
Yeah.
And so I don't really know where I was going with that. I forget where we were.
I think it's a good point though, as far as, there's a bunch of other things you've done that have affected that.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Your ability to retain that skill.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily have to practice that specific skill.
Yep.
I mean, especially the number of years that you've been training, it's quicker to come back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but yeah, guys, I don't know why they just get so caught up in, well, I have to do this only. It's like, no, man, get your back freaking strong. If your back gets strong, then it's odd. Everything else gets better. It's like,
actually that was kind of what I was trying to lead into, was I didn't bench press for 2 years. And then but I was telling this kid a couple weeks ago that if you look at most of my training, like I would say definitely 75+% is posterior chain related. Like it's that, or basically I tell them, like, if you train your legs and hips, I kind of put those together, but legs and hips, posterior chain. And then typically I because I'm a stickler for doing a lot of carries, I throw carries in there. I'm like, you can do your pressing and your arm isolated stuff once a week and be fine. But I was like, I've for the last 10 years, a dominant portion of my training has been very leg and posterior chain related.
Yeah.
And I mean, going on 33 next week, I'm pretty well as strong as I've ever been, and hopefully continuing to get stronger. So
yeah, because that's the big ones that I focus on is, I love weighted chin-ups, and I'll do carries around the weight room.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one that I've been doing a lot of recently is seal rows.
Yeah.
So there's this guy who comes in every single day. Every day, all he does is bench. I've never, ever seen him squat or deadlift. I don't even put up crazy numbers on anything, but he cannot overhead press what I can. He benches 365.
Yeah.
Every day. But anyway, I'm setting up seal rows one day, and I was like, hey man, come over here and do sets of 5 with me. Just try it.
Yeah.
And I ended at, I think it was 100 kilos for 5 reps. And, he couldn't even get 170 for a set of 5. And I'm a small dude, and I'm like, what the hell, man? Like, you've got to get your back stronger.
Yeah.
But I think that's the other part that I've noticed for myself that I've gotten better at over the years is just synchronization of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Getting everything to turn on quickly, aggressively, and at, as fast as I can possibly move, because, we were doing seal rows just the other day. And a bunch of these guys that are, again, way bigger, way stronger, they just don't have the coordination down yet. They don't have the back strength yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, man, just get your posterior chain strong,
Yep.
stay the course, and it'll all work out.
Yeah, that's explains it up very well. I've seen and read numerous things for not only just everyday health, but even for sport performance. Like posterior chain strength is where it's at. If you have the strong posterior chain, everything else is going to follow along with it. So, and I've it was one of those, I read that and I never really thought about it, but then looking, like after reading it, thinking previous years, it's like, I guess I do primarily all posterior chain training. And it's one of those, I'm not going to jump on the basketball court and be dominant up and down the court, but at the same time, like I would be good enough that I could hold my own. Like I'm going to be tired. I'm going to end up feeling like shit for 3 days from running because I don't do that. But my body would be able to withstand it because of the training that I have put in like that. I'm not specified or isolated one thing or another that if I try to go out and do something, I'm going to break in half.
Yeah. Anyway, let's see. I think that was about all the stuff I was wanting to hit as far as training, coaching, all that stuff. But yeah, where are you at on social media, and where can people go and follow along with your training log? Because that's what I enjoy seeing, man, is like all your training. I don't think I recommend everybody listening to this, if there is anybody listening to this, to go on and get an idea of what proper strongman training looks like. So what's your handle and where can people go and check this out?
I would say I am primarily most active on Instagram. But my Instagram, Twitter, I even as an almost 33-year-old have a TikTok. It is bvanmater29. So my first initial and then my last name, and then the number 29. I'll post some stuff on Twitter, and then like everyone, I don't do dances on TikTok. They're just the training video that I posted on Instagram. I also actually have an Instagram for the Wes Del weight room. It is, I think, WD Warrior Strength. Let me double check on that real quick. I haven't posted anything on that in a while.
Yeah, because I've been seeing whenever you do, I see the kids where they're at and their clean progressions. And
the WD Warrior Strength on that one. I keep telling myself I need to start getting videos, and then by the time kids that I would want a video, they'll get done, and I'm like, shit, I should have videoed that. I could have posted it. But I'll get better at that. That's one thing other than only because I video myself to watch my lifts, and then once it's there and it was an okay lift, then I'll end up posting it. But I'm terrible about remembering to do all that stuff on social media, especially in the last year that I now have other priorities.
Yeah, man, other kiddo keeping you busy and all that stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
So, but yeah, hang out for just a minute and I'll discuss a couple things with you.